Welcome back to the Try, Fail, Learn podcast, a podcast all about professionals and the lessons they've learned through the years. In today's episode, we have Ryan French, the Regional Vice President of Sales in the Midwest for Alteryx. Some of you might know him as Ryan from Detroit. So without further ado, let's get into it. All right, Ryan, thank you so much for being on this episode and taking the time to talk with me. If you could, just go ahead and give yourself an introduction and we'll get into it.
Appreciate you having me, dude. Intros are tough, but what I will say is most people know me as Ryan from Detroit with a little hashtag in front of it. I got to start off for where it all started, which was not when I was a baby, when I was born, but when I was born again, right? Like when I was 16 and met my wife, fell in love, like had lots of stuff before that wasn't so great. Parents separated at 10. Grew up born in Detroit, actually. Grew up in a little ghetto town over there that used to be nice, but by the time I was born, it wasn't nice anymore. So a lot of rough stuff growing up, like playing kick the can. Most people don't know that game. Doing a lot of crazy stuff you do when you live in a little hood growing up. But my life really started, I would say, at 16, met my wife in high school, fell in love with her, and then saw the way that her and her parents loved each other and understood that there was something deeper there. And I was raised religious, I would say, raised Catholic. And then I would say the religion kind of pushed me away from God because I didn't understand how one religion could be better or different or right compared to another. And when I met my wife and her parents, and I thought I was smart because I was more agnostic at the time and bitter and young and a lot of testosterone and not understanding why my parents weren't together. I was like, what religion are you? And they're like, we're not. Like, we believe the Bible and we believe God's word and we just try to live that way and do what Jesus did. And it pierced me, man. It pierced me deeply. So that's really when I started to open up my mind on like, okay, maybe there is something more. And you kind of know it, like, we could get into that. I think people, like I talk to so many people, man, and whatever they believe, it doesn't matter to me. I just want to love them. So they loved me through that, gave my life to the Lord, gave my life to my wife, grew up together. And then, dude, I got married while I was in college for engineering at 20 years old. And my wife was 19. I turned 21 3 days after we got married in Hawaii on my honeymoon. And then by the 22, within the same month in August of 2007, I walked the aisle to get my diploma from University of Detroit, mechanical engineering. We moved into our first home, and my wife had our first kid, my daughter, all within the same month, and that was August of 2007. And then, dude, like we can get into it, but like my son came 2 years later. Just living a life of dedication to the Lord and like dedication to my wife and my family. And that's been the constant driver in everything that I've done ever since.
It's so cool that you started with that about like, being born again. And for so many conversations that I have, like I don't share that part, you know what I mean? Like in professional conversations, but, I mean, if you really boil it down, like so much of who I am as a professional and like my leadership strategy and everything I do, like my work ethic comes from a foundation in Christ. I mean, a foundation in the Word. And so I think it's really solid, like really awesome that you started off there because that really does like project into everything that you do. I mean, everything that I do, and you and I feel like are on the same page, and we've talked a little bit before, but I mean, you're a Christian first and then a professional second. And that's the way I like to live my life. I mean,
100%, dude. It's hard. The thing about it is for me, and I've lived a lot of jobs and experiences in life and different parents coming from different backgrounds, all sorts of crazy things, like grew up in some ways with money and then like kind of got poor through the divorce that my parents had, like all sorts of crazy stuff. But what I've realized is that when you live in servitude to others, which is like Christ-centered, Christ-focused, like my conversations to this day as a sales leader, and I don't force it, and I really don't care what people think about. Like I'm not trying to change them. I just want them to be happy. I want them to understand what joy and peace is like because you can't buy those things. So still to this day, if I feel compelled and I'm on a conversation, even a first call with a customer, we'll start talking about each other. And I'm like, hey, my wife's my best friend of 21 years. We've been married 16, going on 17 years this year. And like, I love them. I'm a man of faith. I love my kids. I coach my kids anytime I can. And like, that's who I am. Oh, now you want to talk about business? Let's do it. But like that's the foundation of what makes me who I am.
Right, 100%. Yeah, for
Yeah,
sure. And I want to you mentioned that you went and got an engineering degree. So let's talk about that. So you
sure.
got from University of
Detroit.
Detroit. Okay, cool.
Yeah.
So why did you choose engineering?
Very simple. I talked to my wife's parents, and well, let me back up. When I was actually in high school, and I was so dedicated to serving God, we actually had a church. It's a long story there, but like I got saved and gave my life to the Lord in a big church. And then I became part of the prayer team and a part of all these different things at a young age at 16. Normally they're older and there's elders of the church, and started to realize that just the church was sort of, it was good. They had good intentions, but it was sort of religious more than it was like just trying to live relationship. So I was on fire for God, man. Like I just, it never ended still to this day. So I fully intended to go to school to be a minister. Like that was my plan. Like I had my mom, yeah, I lived with my mom and I visited my dad, but like my mom, she's so awesome. What a great mom. Shout out to you, Brenda Mom on LinkedIn, by the way. That's a funny side note. She like, I never changed it for her because she didn't know how, but she literally signed into LinkedIn and created an account just so she could follow my posts. So she shows up like lowercase Brenda, uppercase mom. And like I just never, like I still smile to this day because she'll always chime in on my posts and be like, that's why we love you, Rye. That's why you're so great. Like she's just one of my biggest fans. Um, but yeah, like she was collecting pamphlets and just, I think there was almost 900 Christian colleges that were there. So senior year of high school,
Wow.
laid it all across the floor. And I'm like, okay, Lord, like show me where to go. Where am I going? And like I heard that still small voice was like, no, like I don't want you to go learn from some other man. Like I'll teach you. And he started bringing me to scripture that confirmed that. And I was like, okay, like somehow I probably knew this was coming or should have at least. And I was like, okay, Lord. And I was like, all right, like I think I'll go to engineering school then. So it was like I needed to get a solid degree, and I was that like typical good at math and science. And I thought there will always be a good technical, like other opportunity for technical solid foundation that you could build on. And we
Sure.
can get into college as well, but that was 100% wise. Like I want to be a better business leader one day. Let me go and do the hard work, and it'll lend itself to me, growing as a leader at some point
Yeah.
capacity.
Gotcha. So
Yeah,
with that engineering degree, I echo that completely. Like there are some degrees and some education, we can get into that more, but like
sure.
they're building blocks, you know what I mean, to other things. Like my best friend got a degree in engineering from University of Central Florida down here, and then went and worked for Lockheed Martin, and now he's running his own business. He's converting like Sprinter vans and things like that into RV campers. So
Love it.
super, super cool guy, super entrepreneurial. Attitude towards life. And so like I'm all like psyched for him and excited. He's in Arkansas now. And um so yeah, I think that there are certain degrees that build, a foundation of learning or education. You know what I mean? Like an engineering degree, there's a lot of technical positions that you can take that to.
For
Um
sure.
but in Detroit, there is a market that is huge, and it's automotive, which is where you started, right?
That's 100% it. Yeah. Like everything I did growing up and everything I knew about was like Detroit was like, it was called the Big Three back then, right? They called it
Yeah.
the Big Three. And then it became the Detroit Three, but it was in my roots. It was in my blood. My grandfather worked for Ford Motor Company back in the day. And like in engineering school, the goal was always find a way to get to what we call an OEM, like go and work for Ford or for Chrysler or General Motors. And what's funny is when I had the opportunity to do that, I turned it down because I realized a lot of that like scrappy hard work was done like one layer down, what we call like a tier one supplier. So yeah, it was an end goal. I ended up not really wanting it in the end, but it was engineering and automotive for sure because I knew there'd be work and I could raise a family on that.
So for me, like a lot of my passions started in high school, right? And that's where I
Okay.
like started with like photography, and I didn't do a lot with video because even back when, I mean, I'm 24, so technology has not really advanced in very much, I guess, in the last 5 years that I've really been involved. But even in high school, entry level video was really hard to get into, and so as a kid is just like making a few bucks, mowing people's grass and pressure washing driveways. That was not accessible. But like a lot of my passions started back in high school, and fed into like what I'm doing now. Like I always loved talking to people and teaching. I was homeschool all the way through, so I was a part of homeschool groups, which feeds a
Nice.
lot into like what I do now with LinkedIn and just like having a platform to be able to talk to people and share things that I'm thinking about. But tell me, like, what was Ryan's passion in high school and
Yeah.
into early years, and even when you were getting an engineering degree and those jobs to pay bills? What was the passion back then?
Yeah, passion's always been centered around people, no question. My mom will tell you that. My wife will tell you that. I love people. I love building relationships, and I love finding ways to help them solve their problems or like align around their value and their needs. Like sometimes people have a hard time recognizing that value within themselves, and I think it's created worth. Not like I coined that, but that's something I think about. Like it's not just worth or value, but like God created that within you. So it was that, but like I loved music, man. Like I grew up, I was that kid listening to everything from, which is relevant from a recent post, but like NSYNC, Backstreet Boys to Eminem, DMX. Like
Yeah.
growing up in the ghetto, man. Like we listened to a lot of hard stuff and then alternative, but like I played music for 7 years. I was a drummer. I played in a jazz band at school. Like I was always competing to get that like top spot, and but I never really practiced in the sense of like I'm gonna go and like practice and become the best musical like composer or be able to read through the music. So like I would learn by listening, like playing by ear a lot, and then kind of pick it up. So I loved it. But then one day, and after I met my wife, it was kind of like it was the Lord. It was like, am I going to go to college for this? And I was like, no, I'm not. Like, this isn't what I want to pursue. So I quit cold turkey. My band teacher, who was a great musician, but interesting fellow, he like told my wife one day, he was like, one of the best drummers I've ever seen in my life. Like, what's going on? And I just felt like the Lord put on my heart, like, this isn't what you're going to do. Like, there's other avenues. So that's when I picked up the camera, checked into yearbook, became I wanted to become a better writer. I was not that great at writing, and I knew it was a tough class because we had a really tough teacher, but a good teacher. And I checked myself in, and man, when first time I picked up the camera, I fell in love. And I was learning everything on film. And then when I was 17, still in high school, I started a wedding photography business that basically took me through my early years of college. I think I photographed a little over 70 weddings, all by word of mouth. Didn't really get into the marketing side of it at that point. Just started letting it grow and self-taught. So it was that was my passion for a long time.
I gotcha. Yeah, I have so
Yeah.
much respect for wedding photographers and videographers. So much pressure, dude.
Yeah.
So much pressure. And I did one, and it was such an absolute. I was like 14, and
Yeah.
I did one like a buddy, and they were like, "Hey, you want to take pictures?" Like, sure. And it was a disaster, bro. I felt horrible. It was like the one time, it's like you can't go back and like redo the wedding
No.
ceremony. You know what I mean? Anyway, so massive respect for wedding photographers.
Yeah.
How did we make the transition from engineering into what you're doing now, which is
Yeah.
more in the sales and very relational, very people oriented, like your passion was? But how did you transition from engineering to that?
So when I became an engineer, I actually negotiated and convinced my company that I was with at the time was TRW Automotive. I convinced the chief engineer that I was working under as like a co-op slash intern. I was like, look, I got a family. My wife and I are going to have a baby. Like I put me to work, like put me to work. I'm ready. So they took a chance on me. They didn't want to lose me. So actually I got hired a year before I graduated as a product engineer. Honestly, bro, like did not want that job. Like I wanted to be a customer facing engineer. And product engineers got pulled into customer meetings, but it wasn't the same at the time. But I took it as a stepping stone, and they were so good to me. Like they basically, I had a leader come to me that really liked me in the customer group. We called it customer applications engineering at the time. And he was like, look, I know, like he sat me down in a room, little conference room. He goes, listen, we love you. Like we want you. This is the best thing for you and for us. Like no one in the customer group or internships, like no one goes and does this and builds that knowledge. Like go and do it for us and bring it back. So like I did it. I was like, all right, I appreciate you. I did it. And then I moved into customer facing roles. So for like 4 years of my 5 years of hardcore engineering, other than that first year, so that was first year product. And then the 4 years following at the same company, I was all over the place, man. I was with like big managers and leaders at Ford Motor Company testing brake noise at 5:30 in the morning on a negative 10-degree day. Like I was going like mad scientist figuring out this stuff in Excel, going through all this crazy stuff. Like people see me now as this like happy-go-lucky guy or whatever, but they don't know like the hardcore data engineering that I've gone through for a decade in automotive. It's cutthroat. You're working on razor thin margins, and like everyone else, there's always like 3 4 people standing behind you waiting to take that business from you, even if you've won it. So like I got my taste of customers obviously from the wedding days, but like I was able to push back into that in the automotive engineering space. And then a supplier of mine that I was working with, Trelleborg, bunch of younger folks that were running the business underneath a president of North America that was probably 40 years old at the time. They saw something in me and they were like, hey, they couldn't say it because it wasn't, we went to lunch one time and I remember the guy was like, hey, he's like, yeah, I'm going to Sweden. He was Swedish. Shout out Ronnie. What's going on, brother? But he's like, hey man, I got to go to Sweden. He's like, but man, when I come back, I got to find somebody. And I'm like, okay, we're eating lunch. And I'm like, kind of hearing it. And he's like, yeah, he's like, I'm like, what are you looking for? Like, if I can help, I'll help. And he's like, well, we're looking for a salesperson. I'm like, that's cool. What kind of background? Like, it's like, we'd really prefer someone that's like, got the technical background. And I got the picture at that point in time. I was like, okay. And he's like, we're looking for someone like you. And like, I looked at him, I was like, all right. And he's like, are you interested? And like, he was super cool about it. So we baked that out and then they gave me my first shot. And, yeah, dude, it was like, there was a transition for sure. Cause when you get into like actual sales, it's different. It's different than selling on only technical. Like now you've got to solve all of their problems, paperwork, procurement, negotiations, all this stuff. So there's a little bit of a transition, but I took over the Chrysler account and grew it like crazy. And then that's actually how I got into sales. And then that's actually how I met Eric Jennings, my boy, DJ EJ, as he hates to be called, but I'll never let die. So yeah, that's how I made the transition.
Okay, I gotcha.
The additional one.
Yeah. So what I think is interesting, and like with the episode with Justin Rowe, we were talking about the philosophy when it comes to sales, right? And in their job, we were talking about, I was saying that sales is really driven by relationship, and you and I have had this conversation before. And with the product that he at impactful.com sells, building those long-term relationships with clients that are soon to be or prospects is not as beneficial for them as it would be for somebody who's selling like something like you guys sell, or like software to run your entire company, things that are going to be huge deals that are going to be months and months in the making, and he mentioned you directly. So my question to you is, when it comes to sales, what is your philosophy for sales? Is it really a foundation of leadership? Is there a balance that you have to draw between spending too much time or?
Yeah, I'll say this, and it ties really well, segues from the technical degree conversation we just had. What I've always said to people is that, and there are some folks I went to school with that are hardcore engineers and like took what they learned from U of D and mechanical and like took it and rode that pony hard. But for me, it was like engineering gave me an opportunity to learn how to critically think through problems. And if I can think fast enough through problems and then get ahead of the customer or get ahead of the issue and see what the outcomes or potential outcomes could be, like it happens so fast once you get used to it. And it's not like you just train yourself to do it. Maybe there's something inherent, like maybe there's a gifting or something there too. But like for me, that's what engineering did for me. And when you think about J-Row and like what they're going after, they're targeting a lot of what we call SMB, right? Like small to medium businesses, because there's a quick sales cycle that happens there, which is awesome. And I would imagine, and I listen to the podcast, which is awesome, dude, you guys killed it. But like, I think if you talk to Justin about, or it bakes out a little bit more on like, okay, but what do those longer term customers look like? You'll probably get to the conversation or land with where I'm going to tell you now on that relationship side, where you need to build trust. So for me, I've built trust with executives. I've become friends with executives. So I got some CEO founders of companies that become good, close friends. I've got CIOs that have moved from big Fortune 200 companies to like go run companies, based on one thing, and that's trusted partnerships. I never bring them a product. I never sell them Alteryx. Like I never sell them our actual technical solution. I'm selling them based on business outcomes. And what ends up happening, and this is me and how I actually believe, like this isn't a front, is that the less I talk about product and the more I talk about their end state, the better off we both are. Because reality is what these leaders don't have, as you get like higher and higher on that hierarchy or that org chart, what everyone will tell you, and you could probably guess right now, is like they lack time, right? When you go and acquire a company, like our company just announced that we were there's an intent to buy a pretty large company for several $100 million, which I wasn't privy to or anything beforehand. But like all this stuff, when you take a look at it, and I've talked to my CEO about this, like we're close friends. The comments that have been made, or the things that I'm being careful here just to not void any trust or anything. But the point is, and he did say this publicly in an interview, you're buying, when you go and buy a technology or a subset of people that have been working on a specific technology, and you bolt that on and like incorporate it into your company, you're basically buying years like to get yourself ahead. Like that's 2 or 3 years you don't have to develop it. I think of my role as the same exact thing for these executives and these sales leaders. Like when they bring me in, I've seen a lot of the things in the space or the areas that they want to work in. Like I've seen what other customers have done. And of course, you're careful not to avoid any confidence or trust there. But I'm going to help them see what that end state looks like, because they've got an idea of like, okay, this is what the dartboard looks like, right? And there's the bullseye. I'd like to get as close as possible. But like, what happens if I miss the bullseye? Or what throwing techniques do I have to have? Like when you start looking at all those things, I can sort of paint that picture for them, and I can roll out the scenarios for them of like, here's 3 or 4 best practices we've seen with these other companies. We helped them do it. Oh, and we've got the internal and external resources that I promise you I'll bring in the best possible. So like they're de-risking their opportunity to get to this end state by bringing someone like me in. And the point is, that's what I teach all of our sales teams. That's what I teach. Like that's what we instruct and we share on and like riff on between me and the other sales reps and the folks that are on my team now. Like how do we offer that so that we never product sell? And one great example I'll give you is that I have a rep on our team that's a fantastic dude, made a transition similar from a different industry into tech a while ago. He was on a call and I was on a call with a customer, a potential customer, and one of our technical resources, we call them sales engineers or solutions engineers. He's like, hey, I've been here 20 years. The call that you just had, he's like, that's the best. They call it discovery when you're going through these question answer sessions. That's the best discovery call I've been on in 20 years. And you guys never talked about product or software one time. Like that's the cherry on top for me right there. Like that's exactly that sums it all up. That's what we try to do when it comes to these bigger companies.
Yeah. That's awesome. That's really cool. I think when I talk to other salesmen, you talk to people in general, there is a thought when it comes to sales is almost like a bad word.
It is.
In some fields, you know what I mean? And they think of, the classic is a used car salesman, you know what I mean? That's going to out there. And I would even venture to say that salesmen of cars in general have this stigma placed on them that, it's just a guy who's trying to hit his quota no matter what. And if he has to bury you in a bad deal, he will, just to make the sale.
It's true.
You know what I mean? But I don't think that philosophy is going to exist forever. And I think part of it is we live in the information age, and a lot of people are doing a lot more research these days than they used to in the past. But also I think that good salesmen know that they want to set people up with the best deal possible.
For sure. Yeah, I think it's value, man. Like that's what we talk about and we preach all over the place here is if the customer can't understand the value you bring to the table and what that end state looks like with you involved, then you're missing the mark. Like you're not bringing them what they actually need. They're not just like everyone knows they have a problem and there's probably 10 solutions that could fit in, even if it doesn't fit perfectly. You want to give them, I kind of make a joke. Sometimes it's not like a hard joke, but I'm like, look, I want to tell the customer, like, I'm gonna put you in the back seat. Like we'll buckle your seatbelt for you. I'm gonna give you a nice iced tea, right? You're gonna chill, sit back. We'll put on some easy music and like let me drive. You want to come up here and like grab the wheel and drive sometimes too. That's fine. But like we're gonna take you somewhere and it's gonna be fun along the way. We're gonna feed you. We're gonna make sure you're taken care of. You're hydrated. But like we'll get you there safely. And oh, guess what? It's gonna be an enjoyable experience. I think so many of these things are so simple and so subtle, and almost everybody or the majority of sales folks miss those opportunities in the in-between. They completely miss it. So I treat my people and my software people, my sales people, my customers, my prospects, my friends, like I try to treat them like gold, man. Like I'm here for a
Yeah.
short amount of time on earth. And if I can give someone something that's going to make their life better, including the sales cycle and customers, like I'm going to do it, man. That's who I am. And like I think that's where a lot of people miss out because they are looking for that paycheck. And telling you, dude, like I don't even look. I don't look at comp statements a lot, like once in a while, but like it's not that for me. I've given up a lot of money to move companies when I knew it was right and God put it on my heart. Like, especially the last company when I moved here, but it's for the bigger, longer term goal.
Yeah. Something you touched on was like making an experience for somebody. And one of my mentors, and I attribute like teaching me everything I know about leadership to this guy, but Hector Vasquez. And I want to get him on one of these. But the dude is just, I mean, amazing guy. Like met me and my wife before we were married, helped us go through, the whole experience of, learning how to communicate to each other and the dynamic there. And just like an awesome guy, really mentored me. The church that we were at really wanted to make sure that people felt welcome and loved. You know what I mean? Every time that somebody came in the door. And something that Hector loved to emphasize was creating an
100%.
experience for people, and if you can create an experience that is a step above what is average or what is expected or what is normal. It doesn't even have to be that crazy outrageous, but if it's just a little bit, you've won somebody over. You know what I mean? And something that really like stood out to me in the field of customer experience was we went to a restaurant for my mother-in-law's birthday, and they like heard it was her birthday and they brought out the dessert or whatever, right? Well, one of the staff went and got like a birthday card. I guess they had birthday cards there, and everybody in the kitchen, everybody around signed it. And I don't know if
Awesome.
that's a common thing.
I've never
I
seen
don't
it.
know.
Yeah, I've
Yeah,
never.
man, I don't go to fancy restaurants. So I was just like blown away that like it was like handwritten with pen. Everybody in the kitchen, all the
That's
wait
awesome.
staff, like everybody wrote this little note like happy birthday. And I was like, she doesn't know you guys. It's not like she's getting a note from her grandma. But the fact that they took the time to make a personal experience for her just like blew me away. And I was like, this is an amazing restaurant. And that is like my goal when it comes to anything that I do is I want to make somebody go like, wow, they took the
Yeah,
time to do that.
I think it's an awesome goal, man, because I think there's so much meat on the bone, if you will, in that space that people just miss it. And it's because people are rushed, they're overworked, they're overburdened, they're thinking process over people. Like there's so many things that you can break that down and talk about, like so many specific points. But I make an intentional effort with my team, with my customers, with my executives, with everyone I come to. Like I want you to know I'm here to serve you. And if I'm here to serve you, I'm going to think on your behalf and in your best interest. And everything I do, like I'm going to prove to you that that's who I am. And like it's never going to go away. And I'm telling you, man, like even the jokes come up with some new customers sometimes. I had a breakfast with one like about 8 months ago, and then I had to hand off the account to some other folks and like finished it at the same breakfast place. It was cool. But initially, when we first met, like they were super stoked. I even took the time to drive out to meet them. But like, of course, a couple, and I get it. Like, I feel the same way. But they're like, "Oh yeah, of course," because like you're the sales guy, right? A lot of conversations like that. But then they realize that okay, he's not that kind of guy, right? And then I've had folks and customers where like I've been badged at customers because I've been embedded into their teams, even though they're literally buying software from me, right? I'm there to sell them more software, like quote unquote air quotes, quote unquote. But reality is like they'll give the reviews and they've talked about afterwards are like I forget that you don't work here. Like I'm a vendor, as they'd say it. It's like
Yeah.
trying to get through procurement or whatever. And like I'm sitting down to have coffee with the procurement guy or gal because we've built a relationship and they realize like they're waiting for that moment where it's like, oh, there it is. Like we were waiting for it, Ryan, and now you just proved it. And it's like, never gonna happen, dude. Like never gonna happen. Like I will be so transparent with you that you'll never get surprised with what I'm doing unless it's like a good surprise. Like, hey, I got you a better discount and there's some strategy around it and it makes sense. But like I just, man, it's that stuff. Like I'm so passionate about that because I've seen it happen in life. Like I've seen people go out of their way for me when they didn't need to. And it matters. Like you don't forget those things.
Right. Right. Yeah. I have so many people that have gone way out of their way for me. And I mentioned Hector is one of them that just like went the extra mile in teaching me things and really mentored. I've got, my grandfather and my dad and my brother. I've got like a ton of mentors in my life. George Speak is the first episode of this podcast was a big one too. But let's talk about that. So mentors in your life that helped you get where you are.
Yeah. I mean, I have to attribute some of the success, if you will, and like me being who I am to my parents for sure. Like, my dad was an entrepreneur growing up. He was a firefighter in Ecorse, Michigan, which is like literally a stone's throw from Detroit. And he's hardcore, man, like the hardcore firefighter. Built businesses outside of being a firefighter, which a lot of folks in that service industry often do. So like a lot of my hustle and grind, like I saw it my growing up, like before my parents separated and even after. And then my mom, crazy, and my aunt and uncle who aren't related, but they're closer than my actual blood aunt and uncles. Like they created, when my parents divorced, like they created a company that was a roofing company, partially so that my mother could be the secretary of the company. This was all part of the plan afterwards. So she could be the secretary and work from our home to raise us and make sure we could get to school and like back on time. Like talk about people giving themselves up for like the greater cause. Like they loved us so much that they created a company. So my mom would not have to go and like put us in daycare, would not have to go on food stamps, like would not have to do all these things. So like I attribute huge amount of who we are, and like what, acknowledge that God has used these folks in our life, and they're such a blessing. My Aunt Teresa, my Uncle Art, my mom. And then I would say, like, when I started becoming a man at 16 and I realized what life was really about, like through all that trouble that we talked about early on, it was my wife's dad, Dave, and like, and her mom, Rhonda,
Bro,
as well. But
hold up. Your
yeah,
father-in-law's name is Dave?
Dave.
Is
Yeah.
it David?
It's David. Yeah.
It's my father-in-law's name, bro. So our
Yeah.
wives are both Rachel and our father-in-laws are both David.
What's your
Lisa.
mother? Okay. So Rhonda, close,
Okay, close.
close.
Almost the same person, man. What the heck?
So dude, like, if there was other than my wife for sure, because I started dating my wife when she was 14. I had a moment, and I know I'm pivoting a little bit, but I'll come back to
Yeah,
Dave.
yeah.
I had a moment where like stupid young kid in a dumb relationship, right? Like one serious relationship my whole life, like bunch of dumb stuff happened. I was just dumb. And then I was like, I'm done. And I'm done until I go to college, and I'm done until I go away to college, like all this stuff. Right.
Right.
And I kid you not, that summer, bro, like I was in student council and I was like the jock and I just did everything at school. So like I was at a orientation dance for freshmen. I was a junior, I was 16, and my wife walks in. And like everything went away and I had tunnel vision, no questions asked, like this beautiful blonde girl. And I was like, what in the world? Like, what is going on? And then like, before I know it, like I didn't, like total random, like her friends dared her to dance with me. So like, she's behind me, like dancing with me. And there's so many crazy stories of like how a year before that, I was in her cousin's house, didn't even know it. We were just walking downtown with some friends, like ended up looking at the cousin's wedding photos. And like the two people I was with, like walked away to talk to the cousin, and I'm left holding the book because they gave it to me. And like I'm staring at my wife, just thinking like, what is going on? And then like I meet her, like she lived around the corner from me, and my best friend, who was 2 years younger than me, never introduced me to her because he was afraid I would take her. So like I would go to his house, I would stay the night, we would travel together, we'd swim in his pool, we'd play baseball together, he'd stay the night. And I didn't realize that like at 6 o'clock when I'd go home for dinner, he'd get on his bike and like wheel his little butt over to like see her and hang out with her and talk with her. So like my wife had
Wow.
shirts. When I met her, they were moving, like I helped them move and stuff, like, and whatever, that she was painting in. Like I remember an old blue Nike shirt with an orange Nike swoosh. And I was like, oh, that's crazy. Like I had a shirt like that. And she's like, oh yeah. And then like, I'm like, that's just nuts. Like what are the odds? And she's like, actually this kid, like, do you know this kid, Joe? I'm like, Murbach? She's like, yeah. I'm like, what? She's like, yeah, this is his shirt. I'm like, no, that's my shirt. Like when I was over, like,
Dude, no way.
yeah. So anyway, so I met her at a young age, but she always spoke with such confidence because her parents raised her in faith, right? And she
Yeah.
spoke with such confidence and wisdom, still does to this day. I love her take. Like she's my confidant, my partner, like everything. So meeting her and then like being intrigued, and then meeting her parents and especially her father, like the most selfless man I've ever met in my life. Like he grew up hardcore, grew up Catholic, but like knew there was more to God than just being religious. Eventually, long story, like got delivered from smoking, all sorts of crazy stuff, and like big God ways. Then
Wow.
gave his life to like serving God and wanting to understand, like not taking a man's word for it. So he basically, without saying like this is what you do, he gave me the guide rails to like allow me to pursue God in a way that religion, the world, books didn't teach you. And he would just like, when I would bump off the bumper, he'd be like, here's why I don't do that. Like, just pray about it. But he knew God in me, and he saw that, like my dedication. So he like kept watering those seeds that God was planting versus like telling me what to do or trying to like brainwash or whatever. He was just always like this gentle guide. And he became my best friend, and he's like 35 years older than me, So I attribute a lot of when you talk about mentorship to him, because I realize that when I walk with the Lord, and in a lot of situations, man, through the history of my career, I often found myself alone. Like and I'm not getting emotional about this, but like I love people so much, but like oftentimes if you just rely on people, they're going to disappoint you because they're not perfect. So I learned to really, within my college, like standing up for truth and being who God called me to be, like I learned to lean on him and have that personal relationship with Jesus, like every day in communication with him. And like, so I've never really taken on a true mentorship. Like it's been me and the Lord. Like I love in automotive, like I'd get into these situations and I'd be in a boardroom, dude, with like six people, and they all know heck of a lot more than I do. And I'd be by myself sometimes, and I'd be like, all right, Lord, let's go do this. Right. And then like end of the conversation, like by the grace of God, like amazing things happen. They trust you, like all sorts of crazy stuff. But that's really the case. I would have to say, like, as soon as someone's like, what was a good mentor in your life? Like initially it's immediately my father-in-law, like becoming a man and like growing into a man of God and like a man who wants to serve and love people. Like he had a tremendous impact in my life. It still
Yeah.
does.
That's
Yeah.
awesome. That's
Yeah.
awesome. I echo that for sure with my father-in-law for sure. A lot of people have put in, countless hours in this dumb kid. I don't know why, but they have, and David is definitely one of them for sure for me as well. So with mentorship,
Yeah.
something that was really emphasized to me when I was growing up, and I still believe it to be true, is, as Christians, but especially as men, leadership is something that we have to be good at.
Yeah.
Especially like I think both sides of, a mom or a dad has to be a good leader. So how does being, you have the background in engineering, which gives you an ability to speak into things that somebody who ideally would just be in sales may not necessarily understand. But really with mentorship and with that and with sales, and now you're in a sales leadership role, how does all that play together in developing you as a leader?
Yeah. I would say that the foundation of all of it in reality is faith. I think people don't give themselves enough credit. Like I think, uh, and this is what's interesting about believing in faith or not having faith. Like if you're not in faith or you don't really understand that relationship side of things, then you're always trying to prove to somebody, to yourself, to some outward, some outward person or external factor that you're good enough. And I think the biggest thing for me in all of those things, when you talk about mentorships, and I think about my parents, my father-in-law, my wife, like my best friends, all this stuff, my kids, I don't have anything to prove to them. Like I want to prove who God is to people because I want them to have that same confidence, that same peace, that same joy, and that same lack of fear to step out and do something. Right. And this is the biggest thing in my life, man. Like if you look at my resume or my LinkedIn profile, like I'm telling you, man, I don't come across people that are like, oh, you're pretty normal. Like everyone's like, what the heck? Like, who are you? Like, what do you do? Like, what's going on? Like that kind of thing. So for me, you have to have confidence to have a foundation. You have to have confidence and the foundation to step out and make choices. And I think we can learn anything if we put our mind to it. Like I always say, like the difference between a doctor or like some, CFO of a company or CEO, like the only difference between them and me is some amount of time dedicated to the craft. Like I could have been a doctor if I wanted to be. I believe it. Like, I don't believe that even people who think they're dumb couldn't, because you see so many examples of athletes and like big, famous people, all sorts of stuff all across that have changed the world from simple ideas. So I think that foundation, man, is so undervalued, and that's what burns in my soul. And that's why like the LinkedIn stuff, that's why everything that comes out of me is like, no, you got this. Like I'm here for you. I got you. Like I can see it in you. So like just keep going until you believe it and you see it in yourself. And like I think that is really the foundation when you talk about getting into leadership, like taking it all up that ladder, if you will, or whatever you want to call it. Like, dude, I was born a leader, bro. Like I've taken opportunities when I've led at other companies. Another company was a big Fortune 200, and like I saw the path. Like I did that. Like, hey, Lord, help me. Okay, let's apply wisdom. I see my boss. I see what they're doing. I see their VP GM. I see what they're doing. I see the SVP above them. I see what they're doing. And all along the way, I'm like, I don't want his job. I don't want her job. I don't want like that's not who I am. So I think leadership is inherent, man. I think it's built into us, and I think to your point, especially becoming a father, a husband, like a friend, leading a team. I tell my team all the time, I'm like, listen, and I worked alongside them as well, by the way, to like earn it. But I'm like, I'm no different than you. I have a different title, which provides me the opportunity to have different responsibilities. But reality is we're the same, right? Like I'm no better, I'm no worse. Like I'm here, I'm a team member, like put me to work. And I just think people miss it, man. Again, like I love to make the distinction between leading and managing so many
Yeah.
times because I've only really worked for the most part for managers, right? Like I've had a select few people in my life that I would call good leaders. And typically when you do that, find those people, you follow them, right? You follow them until you have the opportunity to lead. So long-winded answer. I'm not at a loss for words typically ever. So, but I would say that leadership is key. And I think the foundation of that is actually less about just experience and like knowledge and more about applying wisdom to situations and making sure you're knocking down walls for your people so they can see like, oh, this guy really cares about me. That I think it's super important. And like I said that and like 10 things rolled through my head. I'm like, this opportunity, this spot. Yeah. So
Right. Yeah. But leadership is something that I think we all do. And I had a pastor that said leadership is just a measure of influence. Everybody has a form of leadership at some form in their life. And I remember being in high school and like you, and I was younger, you make dumb mistakes, you know what I mean? So I had like made
sure.
some really dumb mistake and was like going through some hard times, and I was sitting in this homeschool group and I was like the AV guy, because I was the only one that knew how to
Yeah.
work it. So I
Yeah.
was like up at the front of this lady's house, like, plugging in the DVD player, whatever, their computer and getting all this stuff ready to teach this class. And like the unique thing about homeschool groups, it's like all ages, right? So it's like you got high school kids all the way down to like elementary school. And so I'm like setting up all this stuff and I like turn around to like look like out across like all these kids that are sitting there. And like the Lord showed me like whether you think of yourself as a leader or not, all of those kids see you as one. And I
100%,
think
man.
that oftentimes in work we can think like, oh well, I'm not the manager, like I don't have that role, or I'm not this guy's boss. But if you are a voice of reason and a voice of wisdom or a confidant to somebody, or somebody even remotely looks to you as a friend, you have a form of leadership, and I wish that more people would take that seriously. Something that really stood out to me when I was working at the airport is we would constantly, I might get some beef from my old coworkers for this one, but we would constantly have problems. We would like hire these kids. They would come out of Embry-Riddle, right? And they would come on as operations coordinators for the airport. And we would be training, and they were like so cocky, bro. Like literally be like sitting there and like fresh, like not some of them not even out of college yet. And they'd be like, I'm gonna run this airport in a year. It's like, all right, bro, go for
Go,
it. Yeah,
go get
whatever.
it. Go
Yeah,
get it.
yeah, exactly. It's like whatever floats your boat. Like I love your ambition, but maybe let's come back down to earth. Um, and so I like grew to dislike the people that would come out with bachelor's degrees. And as
Yeah.
I got older and started to realize that it wasn't necessarily that they had a bachelor's degree, but it was their outlook and their perspective. We had George speak as the first guest of this podcast, and the dude has as many credentials really as you can get for aviation, but he is like the humblest dude I've ever met. And so what role does humility play in,
Oh man.
I would say, sales, but also leadership, just work in general?
I think it's everything, dude. I think you can boil it all down to that. Like, there's got to be a quiet confidence, like we talked about, and I think that stems for me, at least from a faith perspective. But dude, we all fall down, we all stub our toe, like we all make mistakes. I think humility is huge, and I think God teaches us to have humility, right? Like I know, um, I never. So I think I posted a video on this a while ago, but I never get to the point where I'm like, look at what I did. Like, look at what I did. It's like where my mindset is, my heart, like my being and everything I am, it's like, look at the opportunity that God made that I was able to step into. Look at the people he put in my life that have become a blessing to me, that have helped me get to where I'm at. And then I look at that as more of a mantle's a strong word, but it's a platform or an opportunity that God has made, right? Like people think, you think about ministry for an example, as an example. When I was young in the Lord, and I was telling you, I'm like, I'm going to ministry school. I'm going to be a pastor. Like, I'm going to do all this stuff. Like, my wife and I both had opportunities to step into like actual ministry formally outside of like, we had our church and we were certainly some types of ministers there. But I'm saying bigger churches, like people would see something different in you and then they'd be like, hey, come in. But like, we protected that because I'm like, I'm not going to be influenced by somebody that doesn't think the way that God really wants me to think. So, from that same sense, when I think about humility, it's like nothing, zero, 0.00% of my successes have been because I'm the man or
Mm,
like because I did it so well. It's 100% because God made an opportunity for me and I was able in the moment to like see it by the grace of God and like step into it. So I'm a formal like leader at the company I'm at now because God made enough opportunity for me to be able to pour out to others and bless others that like the doors opened for me. And then it wasn't even a matter of like, oh, look, like I have an opportunity to be a leader. I'm going to go do it. It was like, okay, Lord, what's the right opportunity? And I'll tell you, like, I won't get into too much detail because this will be all over the place. But I had an opportunity to take a spot that everyone you'd talk to who is in management or not would be like, oh, dude, like go get that.
mm,
And I had 100% lack of peace in the situation for a lot of reasons. And like my wife, I would talk to her and she's like, okay, well, what are you going to do? And like I prayed about it. And God said through the whole process, he just kept reminding me, he's like, stay the course. So I'm like, okay, all I know is that God put me here for a reason. I'm going to stay the course. And like on the 12th hour, like D-Day, 0 minutes, like whatever, 0 hours, like I had a text message from someone that was like, hey, like if this doesn't go the way you plan it, like I've got something else for you. And I was praying the night before, like, God, make it clear to me. And like I told this person, I was like, and I like literally texted them back. This was before like the final interview. I was like, you just gave me what I needed right there. And then I told him later, I'm like, I was praying last night. He's like, well, I was with so and so last night at the time you were praying, like talking about you and like saying, what if we could get this guy? So like, I look at this stuff as like, you write the book, like you want to write a chapter in a book. I can't plan this stuff out, man. And like once you have that that recognition and you look up and you think, Lord, you are so gracious towards me and you have a plan that like no man, like the door opens, no man can shut it, no matter what. And I trust that, then that's humility and there's not it's not false modesty. It's like it's who I am, it's what I believe. And the only reason I'm here talking to you, I'm in the position I'm at is because God has made a way for this to happen. And without that, like I would be nobody. And without my faith and without knowing who he is and like being able to humble myself before him on a daily basis, I mean this with 100% honesty. Like I would rather be dead. Like
mm.
if I would give me, like, I would rather be with the Lord, like in heaven than like some other dude that thinks he's got it all figured out and is cocky or whatever, like making a ton of money. Like, I don't want that. Like, keep that far from me, Lord. I just want to be obedient to what you put in front of me, no matter how big or how small. And then I would say what's interesting is the more you believe that and understand it, and you just keep stepping out in faith every time God kind of gives you the nudge, you're faithful in little, like he'll help you have much, like rule over much, be faithful in the big things. So that's it, man. Like that is humility and then stepping out in faith. Like that's the foundation.
Yeah, it
For
has to
everything.
be the key for sure, for sure. So let's talk about LinkedIn. So you and
Sure.
I met through LinkedIn,
Yeah.
and we were connected for a little while before we ever really interacted. And I was like figuring out what I was doing with LinkedIn and wasn't really putting a lot of time into it. And then finally like figured out, what my voice was and started doing more with it. But let's talk about your journey with LinkedIn video. Let's talk about sales tip with Ryan.
Ooh. There's a lot. But by
I
the way,
know.
before we get in that, like I know you know this, but like I'm super proud of you, bro. Like what you've done
Thank
and
you.
what you're doing is like, yeah, I can see it. Like it's moving fast, and maybe you don't feel it yet, but like I've told you this before, but like just keep going. But like LinkedIn, what's interesting, so I told you about the camera stuff, right? And the wedding photography business in high school.
Yeah.
Well, talking back about relationship and understanding who you are, self-awareness, which I praise God for giving me the opportunity to understand who I am and like tip and having a wife that's happy to remind me as my best friend. Like there was a time, and I think LinkedIn videos started around late 2017, early 2018. I have to go back and look. But dude, from like '07 on, for almost a decade, I literally one day cold turkey hung up the cameras and didn't pick them up for like 10 years. And the reason being is as I was getting through my wedding photography, like I was all in on wedding, and I still love cameras and stuff, but
Yeah.
like you could take all my cameras today and it's like whatever, I don't care. But like it had a piece of my heart, right? Like it became, in a way, it was becoming like an idol to me. Like I would go, I'd spend so much time on the internet researching. I was in wedding photography forums. There was DWF back in the day, Digital Wedding Forum. Like I was learning, and I knew I could be a professional photographer. Like I got to the point where I was charging 3 grand a wedding back in like '05, '04, '05. And I'm like, okay, I could see the path to being like one of those guys out in Cali that's charging 10 grand a wedding. Like I knew it. And I had a photojournalistic eye, and like I was doing things different and all this stuff. So like one day I was talking to my wife, and like we were just talking about something, and the Lord convicted me. And I was like, and I talked to her about it, and she's like, yeah, you do, you like, you love this stuff, you know? But it was like, there's a time and a season for everything. And I
Yeah.
realized like I was pricked at the heart, and I'm like, Lord, I don't want anything to come between us. I was like, all right, done. Boom, hung it up. So I hung it up. I think I had a little point and shoot, like no bigger than the phone, you know, that when we went in 2010 to Alaska, long story there, but when we ended up in Alaska for a trip, brought my little point and shoot camera. Like I couldn't, it was like, I didn't care. I just like snapping photos.
Sure.
But then it's funny how God brings things back to you because there's a purpose for it. Like by maybe 2015, 2016, I had a camera, sold a bunch of stuff, and like ended up whatever, like upgrading. And I started messing around with some things, kind of liked it or whatever. And I was like, all right, we'll see. But like, I never did video, dude. I was 100% photography my whole life. That's like, I'm still, as much as people see the videos, they don't know my photography days and like what I do there. Cause like, I don't do it a lot, but anyways. So one day I was like, I think I need to learn video, how to edit, all this kind of stuff. So I started teaching myself a little bit, but didn't love it. And then I was a sales leader at ITW, like that company I was at. And I realized, I'm like, this is not home for me. And there's a long story I won't get into on this podcast now, but I basically, like, there was lots of things that happened, big changes in leadership above me. And then I was asked in an interim period of like, well, okay, what's the real story, and what are you gonna go and get, you and your team? And I gave a number, and the number was like 50% of what they wanted. So instead of telling me, and I'm like, you asked me for the real number, like this is the real number with some stretch in it. I've got 4 people. Here's what we can go do. And they're like, we already told leadership that you were going to go get this other number. I'm like, yeah, but you just made changes because that wasn't accurate. They're like, yeah, yeah, yeah. We're not going to ding you for it. Don't worry. Like, we'll figure it out at the end of the year, but just go do your best. And like, I realized then, I was like, I was so disappointed. So
Mm.
like I went back to my hotel room in Chicago in a Holiday Inn, no joke. I started like fingering through LinkedIn of like, I'm going to go get a different job, which I would never do. Like, not to say what never, but that's not how I work. Right. But I'm like,
Right.
ever like fingering through LinkedIn. I'm like, yeah, I'll show them. Woke up the next morning, figured out that LinkedIn videos, doing it again, like LinkedIn video had just started.
Mm.
And I was like, oh, and like there was something that went off in my head. I was like, whoa. And so then I was like, these are terrible. Like these videos are terrible. Like what are they doing? Like what is going on here? Everybody was in their car talking to their camera the wrong way. It
Mm.
was like everything was vertical. It was like weird, bad
Yeah.
quality. So I grabbed my camera phone and I thought in my head, like real quick, I was like, okay, I'm going to do a sales tip. And when I do this sales tip, I'm going to do it. And it's going to be the worst thing ever. But the sales tip's going to have a line of truth in it.
Mm.
So I'm telling you, like, there's something that we'll share later. It's coming out. That's gonna maybe be a little throwback to the original video. And when people don't know me and they see it, even people that know me, they look and they're thinking like, dude, that was so bad. And in my head, I'm like, I'm not a genius, but like, this is a little bit Michael Scott. Like I was going to go on that line of
Yeah.
like you think that I'm this the dumbest person out here. And like, then I accomplished what I set out to do. But then it was like, I had this dopamine hit and this little like aha moment of like, oh man, like this could be a lane for me. Like this
Mm.
could be like this. I need my right brain to turn on more often because I'm using a lot of left brain right now. So then I just started making deals with myself. And this is kind of how I do it and working out and all sorts of stuff. I'm like, okay, I've got some old Canon equipment that was like, I think I had a 30D at the time. It was a
Okay.
30D. I think I got like $60 for the body when I sold. Now it's all coming back because it's like retro, right? But like
Yeah.
I had a couple lenses. I always shot primes only because I couldn't afford the real stuff, the L glass. But
Yeah.
like I realized that, like whatever. So I started doing video on my cell phone and I said, all right, if I get through 10 videos and I'm still digging it, loving it, I'll go get all my old equipment. I'll sell it, whatever I can buy with that equipment used, because I always buy used, 100% always buy used for me. Like I never buy new. I do have a new microphone on top of my camera, but like never buy new. I was like, then I'll do it. So I got the video 10. The brand came out. It was like Ryan from Detroit. We'll talk about that too. I'll go back to the throwback on how that
Yeah.
name
Yeah.
started. But I loved it, man. And like, then it hit me again of like two things. And I think this is important for people. I'm rambling, but if you're going to do anything, number one, and you have a passion for it, any type of passion, even if it's going to be like, this is going to last me 3 months and I'm out, brand it 100%. Like come up with some brand, like try, fail, learn, like awesome, dude. Like there it is. This is your try, fail, learn podcast season right now. And it might be 10 years. It might be 10 months. But
Yeah.
like you'll always remember the try, fail, learn days. And for me, it was like, okay, what's going to happen? And naturally it was like Ryan from Detroit. So
Mm.
like in that first video, I didn't know what to say at the end. I was like, and I'm like, you're amazing. And I just like slapped the camera and like that became the motto at the end of
Yeah.
all the stuff. Right. So that happened, man. And then like I just started realizing in life, if I'm unhappy right now because of my current work situation, no one's going to come and like grab me and pull me out. Right. Like they're not. So I was like, I'm going to go and connect with as many people that I find interesting as possible. This probably sounds a little bit like J-Ro. We didn't know each other at the time. And I'm going to use video as the vehicle to get there, right? The vehicle to get there. So if I'm going to do this, I'm going to brand it. People are going to know what the brand is. I don't know how big this is going to get. It might not get big at all. I just started connecting, dude. And what people don't know about that is the videos and everything you see are great. All of the work happened, all 80% of it on the backside of LinkedIn, all through the DMs, through connection requests, and like literally every night my kids and wife would go to bed 10 o'clock. I'd be up till 1 or 2 in the morning editing because I was learning editing. I would be on video chats, dude, with people in Australia and Europe, like all
Oh
across the
wow.
world. So like I was just connecting with as many people I could outside of my automotive influence. And then like 250, 300 videos later, man, I got an offer from a software company to come work for them, and I turned down a verbal offer from this company called LinkedIn.
Oh, who's man? Dang, what the heck?
Yeah, it was crazy. Like I thought that was the dream job for me.
Right? Yeah.
And it probably would have been fun. And I know some folks there and like great company, great people. But it was one of those things like when I knew I had it in the bag, I prayed about it over the weekend and the Lord was like, this isn't what I have for you. Like you'll be blessed in it, but like there's better. And I was like,
Right.
oh, like I had a sinking feeling. Told the recruiter on Monday. She's like, what? And I'm like, I love the company. And she's like, she literally was like, you have no experience in this space, like zero. She's like, but you're the most passionate person I've ever met about LinkedIn. She's like, you belong here. And I was like, I
Wow.
know, but I can't take the job. She's like,
Mm.
whoa, you seem so sad. She's like, I just like to say not now, you know? So yeah, bounced around a little
Wow.
bit there, but yeah, there's so much, dude. And like you and I are sitting here talking, and I'm sitting at a software company number two out of California and connecting with all these amazing people through this tech because I turned on the camera in Holiday Inn on LinkedIn and said like, I'm Ryan from Detroit, and like you're amazing. Like that was the whole thing.
Yeah. I think what's super important for people to take away, especially from anybody who's going to talk to you about LinkedIn content, is that like you can do exactly what you did. You can make these, fun sales tips videos. You can make a bunch of videos you're being goofy or whatever it is. But like you touched on and like Justin touched on, there is so much work on the backside. You know what I mean? With just connecting with people and commenting on things and engaging with people in a community. Because like that's what I didn't get. And I feel really stupid to say this because I've been on LinkedIn for like 2, 3 years. And
Yeah,
before I like literally didn't even realize this until like a month ago, 2 months ago.
it's
You
all
know what I
good,
mean?
man.
But like nothing is going to go anywhere unless you engage with people. And that's exactly what you and Justin did. And it just like took off, bro. Like the content is great, but there's so much about like literally just engaging with people that I think is the biggest thing that you can do.
Well, and throw back to what you said. Like if we go backwards, you said, what are you passionate about? People. Like
Right.
I was like, okay, what am I most excited about when it's in my career? I get so lit up, man, inside when I'm going to go visit a customer. Still
Hmm.
to this day, 100%. I'm going to jump on a call with you. Like I'm going to talk to people. I think about people all day. Like I love people, dude. Like I love people because I know that they have opportunities to grow within themselves, whether it's business or personal. And if I can be a small part of that, like a conduit, then that is like I actually feel like, and again throwing it back to like to the words of Jesus back in the day when the apostles came up to him and he's like they're like, hey, we got you a bunch, I'm paraphrasing of course, but like, hey, we've got some food, and he's like, no, I've got meat you don't know of. And they're like,
Hmm.
where'd you get your food? Like we had the money, we had the food, and like they didn't get it at first, but like for me, that's pouring into people. Like I am fueled by seeing people like actually move ahead, have faith, like faith grow within them, like find joy and peace and like get settled into that. Because dude, the world is crazy and there's so much that goes on. But like my safe place is like being in front of a camera, talking on the phone, being with my family and friends, like being with the people. So for LinkedIn and for people that are listening to this, if you're passionate about people, find a way to engage and like find a way to add value. That's all I can say. Like that, I am. I'll give you a quick example. I'm talking to you right now from a place of like formal leadership at a software company that's $650 billion company, right? With a bunch of executives that have done this before at big companies like Palo Alto Networks and Cisco and like all these companies, simply because of this. And this is like what a lot of people don't know, and I won't name the person, but I connected with someone on LinkedIn years ago. This person was based out of Chicago. This person had a software company that was a startup, and I was in automotive. And like I was like, hey, love to chat. Great, let's do it. We ended up chatting. He tells me his story. I'm like, hey, I'm gonna be in Chicago. I come there every month. Like, if you're cool, man, like just there's no strings attached. Like, I would love to just sit down and chat with you over coffee or food. He's like, awesome. I get there. Again, I'm telling the story exactly how it is without naming names, but like I want people to know this because it's not me. Again, talk about humility, like all glory to God on this. God put it on my heart to do this for this guy. I went and talked to him. I ended up buying dinner that night. I insisted, like God put that on my heart. I did that. And then he shared with me a bunch of stuff about his software. He was going to do like a basically a 1.0 launch. He had already launched initially. And I was like, dude, before you do that, if you'll let me, like, I would love to talk to a couple of people I know because I think you're undervaluing your software. I think you should price it higher. I think you'll leave money on the table. And I kid you not, bro, and you know me now, but like there was zero thought in my mind of like, I want to go work for this guy. I want some like it was zero. It was like, how can I help this guy? Because I reached out to a guy I was working with who was my counterpart when I was leading sales. He was leading ops. He was a director. He's like, dude, buddy of mine who I used to work with at this other company, smartest guy I know. He was actually on my team, but I feel like we worked for him. He just was here last week, and here's his business card on my desk. Like I'm in Chicago in the plant, mind you. You should call him and ask him. Like, yeah, because I'm like, hey, all I want to know is like, what would you pay for this software? I don't get anything out of it. It's for a friend. And he's like, I could tell you, Ryan. He's like, but you should call this guy and ask him because he'll know. He had no idea what he was doing about this. Like he just did. The card was on his desk while I'm talking. He's like, hey, it's funny you should ask. Dude, I call this guy. We get on the phone for 20 minutes. He's the head of supply chain for a software company called Anaplan. And 20 minutes in, he answers my question. And then he goes, by the way, have you ever thought about working in tech? I grew up in the Midwest. I know people like you. You're a super smart guy. We need people like you to sell. Bro, if I wouldn't have picked up the camera, I wouldn't have stepped out and made the brand, I wouldn't have captured the value, and I wouldn't have poured into people as much as I could on camera, off camera, and like taken that initiative, we may not have even met. And like that's the stuff that blows me away. And like in those like really crazy days when I'm low carbonate and I didn't get any Swedish fish, like I could actually tear up and cry about that. Like that's the stuff that God does on the daily. Yeah. For me and for people around me. And that's the whole thing right there. It's like my wife and I talk about this kind of stuff in our lives, like almost every morning over coffee. And I'm just like, this is crazy. Like, what are we doing here? Yeah. And like, she knows, I'm like, it's a ministry. I had a sandal company. I started for like 2 years. I'm like, I want this to be a ministry. She's like, how's a sandal company going to be a ministry? Well, guess what? Call it Exodus Sandals. Lots of pastors start calling you wanting free sandals, believe it or not. And they're like, hey, like, let me talk to you about your life and why it's great. And I'm like, that's awesome. And then the Holy Spirit speaks to you and you're like, but this is what God wants you to do. And they're like, bah, start crying, So like sandal company becomes a ministry. So like everything for me, man, is about all focused on that one focal point, which is eternal life for people, joy and peace and eternal life. So
yeah, that's awesome. That's awesome.
I got 1,000 stories, bro.
Yeah, I'll bet you do.
1,000. Yeah.
So let's wrap it up. I got 2 last questions for you.
Okay.
So we got worst advice you ever received and the best advice you ever received.
Oh man. Well, let's go with the best advice first, because that one's a little easier.
Okay.
Give my life to the Lord, right? Like giving my life, surrendering who I am and the way I think to align with the way that Jesus thinks and the way that God set it up for us to think. And the reason being is obviously eternal life, but the truth is like, I didn't start to really move and like figure things out until I surrendered to him. Like so best advice was like from my father-in-law and my wife, like you should give yourself to this thing if you believe it. And it was the Lord. And like, I knew it, like he got me, man. And like I said, like you could take everything from me today and I wouldn't be a different person. And I think that you take a little bit from a lot of people today and their whole world turns upside down. So best advice would be, pursue Christ, man. Pursue a relationship with him. It's not about religion. It's about having faith and like being able to have communication with God. That's the whole reason why Jesus came and then had to go. So for me, that's the best advice. The worst advice, the things that comes to mind is, well, there's a couple things actually. But there's always this thing, especially as a man, where it's like everybody tells you like, go get yours, like you got to get yours. You got to be ruthless in business. You got to be like, you got to go and climb over people, like whatever, like don't worry about the body, like all the stupid things that we've heard. Like it's the worst, man. Like flip that thing upside down. All I've done in my career and all I've tried to do, I'm not perfect, but it's to lift people up around me. So like if you're looking to get yours or you're looking to better your life, specifically, like I got to do this for me and like it doesn't matter what anyone else, like I got to go and get mine. I think people are going to fall short. I think that they end up in a very unhealthy, like unhappy place because the enemy's a hard taskmaster, bro. Like you're going to get stuff put on you that nobody can live up to, and then you're just going to start feeling bad about yourself. So that's terrible advice. Like don't look to seek your own gain like the world, like every like hardcore businessman and multi-millionaire teaches. Like not saying everyone that has money is like that, but you know the people I'm talking about. Like seek to lift up a brother or a sister in need and watch God work on your behalf. That's what I got.
And that is a wrap for this episode of the Try, Fail, Learn podcast. If you like what you heard, please leave us a rating and review. We'll catch you next time.